It was supposed to be a fresh start for the Lee family. After years of hard work and sacrifice, May and Jin Lee had finally moved their family into a quiet suburban neighborhood. The family of four, a humble and close-knit unit, was filled with hope for the future. However, their arrival didn't go unnoticed, and not all their neighbors were welcoming. Among them was Greg, a man whose prejudices were as loud as his booming voice.
Greg was the self-appointed king of the cul-de-sac, a man who prided himself on keeping his neighborhood just the way he liked it. When he noticed the Lees moving in, his reaction was immediate and fueled by ignorance. Greg took one look at the new family, their Asian heritage, and their modest demeanor, and decided they didn't belong. People like them shouldn't live here, he muttered under his breath as he watched the Lees unpack their belongings. From that moment, Greg made it his mission to make their lives as uncomfortable as possible. What Greg didn't know, however, was that the Lees were not ordinary people. Beneath their quiet exterior lay a history of strength, discipline, and resilience forged through years of training in martial arts. Jin Lee, a master in his discipline, had been teaching martial arts for decades, passing on his skills to his wife May and their two children, Ethan and Lily. But their skills weren't a show of power. They were a symbol of restraint and inner peace. This was the code they lived by, a code Greg was about to challenge in the worst way possible. As Greg's harassment began, the Lees chose to remain calm, embodying the discipline they had spent their lives perfecting. They believed in resolving conflicts with grace and patience, but Greg's actions soon tested their resolve. He underestimated them, assuming their politeness was weakness. Little did Greg know, his actions were setting the stage for a dramatic lesson in humility and justice, one that would leave the entire neighborhood talking. The Lees were the kind of family that valued hard work, integrity, and humility. Jin and May had built their lives on these principles, raising their children, Ethan and Lily, to approach the world with kindness and resilience. The move to their new neighborhood was meant to mark the next chapter in their journey, a place where they could plant roots and continue building their dreams. Jin Lee was not just a father and husband. He was a respected martial arts master with decades of experience. Born into a family that had practiced martial arts for generations, Jin learned discipline and self-control at a young age. He carried these values into adulthood, where he met May, a skilled martial artist herself. Together, they built a life centered on family and community, running a small martial arts studio that provided affordable classes to children in underserved areas. Their children, Ethan and Lily, were no strangers to the training room. Ethan, at 16, was a disciplined and focused teenager who balanced school with rigorous martial arts training. He admired his parents deeply, aspiring to one day teach alongside them. Lily, at just 10 years old, was equally impressive, her small stature belying her quick reflexes and sharp technique. The Lees trained together as a family, not for competition, but for the personal growth and peace that martial arts brought into their lives. Moving into the new neighborhood, the Lees hoped to find a sense of community. May and Jin encouraged their children to focus on their studies and make new friends, emphasizing that respect and kindness were the foundation of all relationships. They were aware that their quiet and humble nature often led people to underestimate them, but they saw this as an opportunity to lead by example. They believed that true strength was demonstrated through actions, not words. Despite their optimism, it wasn't long before Greg's behavior made itself known. From the first day they moved in, Greg watched them with a suspicious eye, his demeanor cold and dismissive. The Lees could sense his hostility but chose to rise above it, determined to show that they were there to contribute to the neighborhood, not disrupt it. What they didn't expect was how far Greg would go in his attempts to demean and harass them. Greg was a man who thrived on control. In his mind, the neighborhood was a reflection of himself, and anything or anyone that disrupted his vision was unwelcome. He took one look at the Lee family and decided they didn't belong. To Greg, their cultural heritage and quiet demeanor were an affront to the carefully curated image he believed the neighborhood should maintain. At first, Greg's actions were subtle, almost passive-aggressive. He would make loud comments in his driveway about how some people just don't fit in here. He would blast his music late at night, knowing it would disturb the Lees. Over time, his harassment escalated. He began filing complaints with the Homeowners Association, accusing the Lees of minor infractions like improperly parked cars or unkempt yards, claims that were blatantly untrue. His goal was clear: to intimidate the family into leaving. Greg's behavior reached a new low when he started vandalizing their property. One morning, the Lees woke up to find trash scattered across their lawn. Another time, they found graffiti on their mailbox. The acts were small enough to avoid legal consequences, but significant enough to send a message. For Greg, this was a game, a way to assert his dominance and remind the Lees that they were outsiders in his neighborhood. What fueled Greg's actions was not just ignorance, but insecurity. He felt threatened by the Lees, though he would never admit it. Their quiet strength and unwavering dignity were a stark contrast to his loud and brash demeanor. He couldn't understand how they could remain so composed in the face of his hostility, and this only made him angrier. To Greg, the Lees' refusal to react was a challenge he was determined to win. Greg's harassment didn't go unnoticed by the other neighbors, but most chose to look the other way. Some agreed with Greg's views but didn't want to get involved. Others sympathized with the Lees but feared becoming targets themselves. The silence of the community allowed Greg's behavior to continue unchecked, emboldening him further. He believed he had all the power, unaware that his actions were laying the groundwork for his own humiliation. Despite Greg's constant harassment, the Lees remained steadfast in their commitment to patience and peace. May and Jin had always taught their children that violence was never the first answer, no matter how justified it might feel. Their martial arts training emphasized control and discipline, and they believed that strength came from knowing when not to fight. Jin often reminded Ethan and Lily of an old proverb: "The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists." It was a lesson in resilience, a reminder that patience and humility were powerful tools in the face of adversity. Ethan, however, found it increasingly difficult to follow this advice. As a teenager, he struggled with the desire to stand up to Greg and protect his family. "Why should we let him treat us like this?" he asked his father one evening. Jin placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder and said, "Because we are stronger than his hatred, and one day he will see that." The Lees channeled their frustration into positive actions. May and Jin focused on their work, finding fulfillment in teaching martial arts to their students. Ethan and Lily poured their energy into school and training, determined to excel despite the challenges they faced. Together, the family found strength in each other, using their shared values to navigate the hostility around them. But Greg's harassment showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, their patience seemed to embolden him further. He interpreted their calmness as weakness, convinced that he could push them as far as he wanted without consequences. What Greg didn't realize was that the Lees weren't ignoring his behavior out of fear. They were waiting for the right moment, the right reason, to stand their ground. That moment was fast approaching. As weeks turned into months, Greg's actions became more aggressive and invasive. He began spreading rumors about the Lees to other neighbors, accusing them of being troublemakers who didn't respect the community's rules. He even called the police on false accusations, claiming the Lees were hosting loud parties or violating noise ordinances. Each time, the authorities found nothing wrong, but the stress and humiliation of being targeted took its toll on the family. One evening, Greg crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. During a heated argument with Ethan in the front yard, Greg hurled a racial slur loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. Ethan clenched his fists, his martial arts training urging him to remain calm even as anger bubbled inside him. May and Jin, hearing the commotion, quickly intervened. Jin looked Greg in the eye and said firmly, "This is your final warning. Leave us alone." Greg sneered and walked away, but the smirk on his face hinted that he wasn't finished. The family knew they couldn't let Greg's behavior continue unchecked. They began documenting everything, every incident, every insult, every act of vandalism. May contacted a lawyer to understand their legal options, while Jin spoke to other neighbors, quietly gathering support. The Lees weren't just preparing to defend themselves. They were preparing to teach Greg a lesson he would never forget. Greg's behavior reached its peak on a sunny Saturday afternoon. The Lees were hosting a small family gathering in their backyard, celebrating May's birthday with close relatives. The sound of laughter and quiet conversation filled the air as the family enjoyed homemade dishes and shared memories. For the Lees, this was a rare moment of joy amidst the tension Greg had created. However, Greg saw the gathering as yet another opportunity to assert his dominance. Furious at the sound of celebration next door, he stormed onto the Lees' property, shouting insults and accusing them of violating neighborhood rules. "This isn't your kind of place," he bellowed, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby neighbors. His intrusion quickly escalated as he kicked over a table, scattering plates and food onto the ground. The guests fell silent, shocked by Greg's audacity. May and Jin stepped forward, calm but resolute. Jin spoke firmly. "You've gone too far, Greg. This ends now." Greg, emboldened by his unchecked behavior, sneered and stepped closer, attempting to physically intimidate Jin. "What are you going to do about it?" he taunted. In that moment, Jin signaled to Ethan and May with a subtle nod. The family's years of training came into focus. Ethan stepped forward with a steady stance, his movements deliberate and controlled. May stood beside Jin, her posture calm but ready. "We warned you," Jin said, his voice steady, "but you refused to listen." Greg dismissed their warning with a mocking laugh, lunging toward Jin in an attempt to shove him. But before he could touch Jin, the Lees acted with precision. In a blur of synchronized movements, Jin sidestepped Greg's advance while May swiftly disarmed him, neutralizing his aggression without causing harm. Ethan blocked Greg's path as he tried to flee, his stance firm but non-threatening. Even young Lily, standing to the side, demonstrated her composure, watching her family handle the situation with grace. Greg was left standing in the middle of the yard, disheveled and humiliated. The neighbors, drawn by the commotion, watched in stunned silence from their porches and windows. The Lees hadn't raised their voices or escalated the situation, but their actions spoke louder than words. Greg's arrogance and aggression had finally met its match. The confrontation in the Lees' backyard became the defining moment of Greg's humiliation. After his failed attempt to intimidate the family, he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. However, the Lees didn't use their martial arts skills to harm Greg or seek revenge. They used them to neutralize his aggression and protect their family. Jin, standing tall and composed, addressed Greg directly. "Martial arts isn't about violence. It's about discipline, self-control, and protecting what matters most," he said. His calm tone carried an air of authority that silenced Greg's protests. "We've tried to live peacefully, but you left us no choice. Let this be a lesson to you." Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "You assumed we were weak because we chose not to fight back. But strength isn't about who's louder or more aggressive. It's about knowing when to stand up for what's right." His words carried the wisdom instilled in him by his parents, and the onlookers couldn't help but nod in agreement. The neighborhood erupted into quiet applause as the Lees demonstrated their composure and integrity. Even the children watching from nearby yards looked on with admiration, inspired by the family's grace under pressure. The scene wasn't just a display of martial arts. It was a powerful statement about dignity and the power of restraint. As Greg stood frozen in embarrassment, Jin added one final comment that resonated deeply. You've spent so much time trying to tear us down, but you've only revealed your own weaknesses. Maybe it's time you look inward and figure out why you felt the need to act this way." Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the neighborhood. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know about the Lees' remarkable display of strength and composure. For some, it was a wake-up call about the dangers of prejudice. For others, it was a moment of inspiration, showcasing how dignity and discipline could triumph over hatred. Neighbors who had previously remained silent began to express their support for the Lees. Some stopped by with kind words and apologies for not speaking up sooner. Others offered to help the family clean up the mess Greg had caused during his tirade. It was clear that the incident had shifted perceptions in the community, painting the Lees in a new light as symbols of resilience and grace. Greg, on the other hand, found himself ostracized. His once commanding presence in the neighborhood had evaporated, replaced by whispers of disdain and disapproval. His actions had not only humiliated himself, but had also exposed the deep-seated prejudice that fueled his behavior. He avoided making eye contact with his neighbors, ashamed of the reputation he had built for himself. Despite the newfound support, the Lees remained humble. They didn't gloat about their victory or seek revenge against Greg. Instead, they used the opportunity to foster understanding and connection within the community. May suggested hosting a neighborhood gathering to promote dialogue and unity, and Jin offered to teach free martial arts classes as a way to share the values of discipline and respect. The Lees' efforts to build bridges didn't go unnoticed. Their actions inspired many neighbors to reevaluate their own biases and assumptions, creating a ripple effect that brought the community closer together. Greg's behavior had started as a divisive force, but the Lees' response had transformed it into an opportunity for growth and healing. For Greg, the aftermath of the confrontation was a bitter pill to swallow. His arrogance and ignorance had been exposed in front of the entire neighborhood, leaving him isolated and humiliated. But as the days passed, Greg found himself grappling with a new and unfamiliar emotion: regret. At first, Greg tried to justify his actions, blaming the Lees for provoking him or accusing the neighbors of overreacting. But as he replayed the events in his mind, he couldn't ignore the truth. The Lees had done nothing to deserve his hostility. They had shown him kindness and patience at every turn, even when he gave them every reason not to. Greg's reflection forced him to confront the prejudice that had driven his behavior. He began to see how his assumptions about the Lees, based solely on their heritage and quiet demeanor, had blinded him to their strength and character. He also realized that his own insecurities had played a role in his need to dominate and control others. It was a hard truth to face, but it was one that Greg couldn't ignore. Determined to make amends, Greg took the first step by writing a heartfelt letter to the Lees. In it, he apologized for his behavior and acknowledged the harm he had caused. He expressed his admiration for their resilience and thanked them for handling the situation with more grace than he deserved. It wasn't an easy letter to write, but Greg knew it was necessary. Greg's journey toward redemption wasn't instantaneous. It took time for him to earn back the trust of his neighbors and to prove that he was committed to change. He began attending the martial arts classes Jin offered, hoping to learn more about the values of discipline and humility. Slowly but surely, Greg began to rebuild his reputation, not as a bully, but as someone willing to learn from their mistakes. The Lees, despite their initial struggles, became a powerful force for positive change within the community. Instead of using their victory to isolate themselves or further humiliate Greg, they chose to use the incident as an opportunity to educate and inspire. Their response demonstrated that true strength lies not in retaliation, but in building bridges and fostering understanding. Jin and May began offering free martial arts classes every weekend in the community center. These sessions weren't just about self-defense. They were about teaching the values of discipline, respect, and self-control that the Lees had embodied throughout their ordeal. The classes quickly gained popularity, attracting neighbors of all ages and backgrounds. Even children who had once been hesitant to interact with the Lees now looked up to them as role models. Ethan, the teenage son, also found a new purpose in the wake of the confrontation. Empowered by his family's resilience, he began advocating for anti-racism initiatives at his school. He partnered with teachers to organize workshops on diversity and inclusion, sharing his family's story as a way to inspire empathy and understanding. His efforts earned him recognition, not just from his peers, but also from local leaders who invited him to speak at community events. The family also used their newfound visibility to support charitable causes. May and Jin organized fundraisers to support immigrant families and cultural exchange programs, ensuring that others wouldn't feel the isolation they once endured. The Lees' actions transformed the neighborhood, fostering a sense of unity that hadn't existed before. Their quiet strength and humility became a legacy that inspired not only their immediate community, but also those who heard their story from afar. Even Greg, the former antagonist, began attending the martial arts classes. At first, he was met with skepticism from the other participants, but Jin welcomed him with the same patience and kindness he had shown all along. Over time, Greg's participation became a symbol of redemption and the possibility for personal growth. The Lees' influence extended beyond the physical skills they taught. They also imparted the values of empathy, accountability, and mutual respect. The story of the Lees and their racist neighbor Greg is a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of treating others with dignity. What began as an ordeal marked by prejudice and harassment transformed into a journey of justice, redemption, and community building. The Lees' response to Greg's hostility showed that true strength isn't about physical power. It's about grace, patience, and the courage to stand up for what's right without compromising your values. Greg's transformation was a testament to the Lees' ability to lead by example. His journey from ignorance to understanding demonstrated that change is possible when people are willing to confront their biases and take responsibility for their actions. By extending forgiveness, the Lees didn't just resolve their conflict with Greg. They set a standard for how to handle prejudice with integrity and compassion. The neighborhood, once divided by misunderstanding and indifference, became a stronger and more inclusive community because of the Lees' efforts. The martial arts classes, diversity workshops, and charitable initiatives they introduced left a lasting impact, proving that one family's courage can create ripples of change far beyond their own home. As for the Lees, their story continued to inspire. Jin's words during the confrontation became a mantra for the neighborhood. True power lies in self-control, respect, and using strength to protect rather than harm. It was a lesson that resonated with everyone who heard it, reminding them to see the humanity in others, no matter their background or appearance. In the end, the Lees didn't just change their neighborhood. They showed the world what's possible when resilience meets humility, and when justice is pursued with grace. Their journey serves as a beacon of hope, reminding us all that even in the face of prejudice, there is always room for understanding, growth, and redemption.